Now to the rain now for our fodder panel discussion. And I'm joined by Martin Ryan, Technical Manager at Glanbia, Lorca McCabe, Deputy President of the ICMSA, Fine Gael's Pat Deering, who's Chairman of the Ag Committee, and Charlie McConalogue, Ag Spokesperson with Fianna Fáil. Thank you very much for calling in to us. Martin, I'll just start with yourself. The Glanbia region has been hit particularly bad by the fodder shortage. Can you just describe the situation on the ground at the moment?
I suppose on the ground at the moment there's been a fair bit of recovery from where we've been, there's no doubt about that. But right now I would think that roughly half of our farmers in the South Leinster region in particular would be short some fodder, and I think the average would be around in the mid-20s in terms of percent. But there has been a substantial recovery and the gap has closed somewhat. So that's in a more manageable place than where it might have been, yeah.
Can you take us back to a number of months ago when we were in the midst of the severe drought? Can you reflect back on that and what it was like and the outlook at the time?
Absolutely. I suppose our worst point would have been the 25th of July to the first few days of August. I think right at that point we had almost zero grass growth. It was certainly down to about 10 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So we were sort of growing less than 1/6 of the requirement in terms of demand. And all of that gap was filled with, first of all, concentrates in the parlour, then with straights in terms of maybe fed outside by a fence wire, and in many cases feeding maybe a quarter of the cow's requirement with grass silage. So it was really eaten into the winter fodder reserve. But we've kind of reversed that trend substantially, and through August, I suppose, as silage was withdrawn from the diet, and more recently straights, milk and grass came back, milk has gone up, and I suppose costs have come down. But all the focus has been on trying to recover additional grass for actually making extra fodder.
Charlie, yesterday Fianna Fáil launched your plan on how to alleviate the fodder situation over the next coming months. Can you just outline the steps that you have announced in that plan?
Yeah, well, it's a 10-point plan, and it covers all the bases in terms of what we believe is needed in the immediate term. But I think the key issue is around credit availability as we go into the winter months, because farming has come out with two fodder crises in the last 5 years, but particularly the last 18 months, from a very bad back end at the end of last year to the prolonged fodder crisis in the spring, and then the unprecedented drought. And as a result of that, farmers are carrying a lot of debt, are carrying a lot of merchant debt, and they're facing into a winter as well where feed is going to be, first of all, scarce, and at least I know the Chuggas figures show there's at least 11% fodder scarcity at the moment, but also in terms of concentrate prices, which are going to have to be fed more heavily this year, are going to be higher. So there is a real difficulty there, and what we are calling on the Minister for Agriculture to do is to introduce a loan scheme using the auspices of the SPCI to ensure that there's a product available which will be accessible to farmers over the months ahead. And the other thing we're saying needs to come into place as well is an allocation put in place for a hardship fund, because undoubtedly as the weeks and months go on over the course of this winter, some farmers are going to find themselves in a very difficult position altogether, and credit won't be an issue. They'll actually find themselves in hardship, and the government needs to be in a position to actually support them. And one final point as well, Claire, which I think is urgent, needs to happen, and that's that the Beef Forum, which hasn't met since last February, I know it's scheduled to meet around mid-October, but the Minister needs to call that in immediately within the next week and ensure that there's a spotlight shone on the factories with regard to how prices are and how they're dealing with the increased supply of cattle that's coming on stream at the moment, to ensure that they don't take advantage of the situation and lead to even poorer profit margins for farmers as a result.
On the hardship fund, Charlie, how much money is Fianna Fáil looking for that? How much do you think should be in that? And where is that fund going to come from?
Well, obviously the budget is being discussed at the moment, and the Minister has found some funds in relation to fodder import from abroad. But we will be estimating that that there should be in the region of €10 million put aside to fund that and to be in place. But we do think that the most important issue at the moment is putting in place a loan scheme and credit facilities, because if that's done properly and if it's structured in such a way that the interest rate is low and that the loans are guaranteed through the SPCI and through the government allocation of funding, then hopefully by putting that in place, it will provide the support that most farmers need to be able to tide them across the winter.
Pat, is the government, we're hearing a lot about the severity of the situation, and a lot of it is based as well on projections on a looming crisis over the winter period. How would you describe the situation at the moment? Is it a crisis? Is it a shortage? And how would you describe the government's response? Is Minister Creed doing enough?
Well, I'd say first of all, it's a shortage at the moment. We probably haven't got to the crisis stage yet. As somebody who farms, dairy farms in Carlow, which is, as Martin would know, probably right, if I could use pardon the pun, in the eye of the storm from a fodder or crisis point of view or a shortage point of view during the summer. Probably Carlow, I'd say, was probably the worst affected area if I look at the figures over a period of time. So, from my own point of view, personally, I haven't got second cut silage. I would hope to get it next week. First cut was reasonably good, but what is going to be available now in second cut is going to be scarcer than what we would have had in a normal second cut year. So there's going to be a shortage issue from that point of view. There's going to be a deficit. But I suppose our saving grace, if I could hope to put it that way, is that growth has been reasonably good in the last period of time, and we would hope that will be extended into maybe late October, early November, which could be a good saving for us, and hopefully obviously then an early spring next year. With regard to what has been done so far from our own committee's point of view, which Charlie is a member of us as well, we called forward a meeting of our committee there in the first couple of days in September to exactly see what was happening. We invited the Minister in, his officials, and we invited in the banks as well. We invited in the main banks, Bank of Ireland, Ulster Bank and AIB, plus the SBCI, because they had been funding the previous low-cost interest loans. And there's been a lot of talk about low-cost interest loans up to now. We want to see exactly what their involvement was with the previous one, how they were going to be dealing with a potential future one as well. But one of the things, I suppose, we could argue that last year's loan, what the main, obviously, the first point was that it was going to help merchant credit, which it did, and there was 150 million available, which went to the different sectors on a proportional basis. But then what it did also was it really made the banks sit up and take notice. And some of the banks have been more proactive, I'd have to say, in the last period of time in introducing schemes that were going to be helpful. For example, Bank of Ireland told us when we had the meeting, they had introduced a scheme, a 100 million scheme to set aside, where funding was going to be available at 3.8%, which is a reasonably good competitive price for fodder alone. So I suppose you could argue that has an effect. The fact that the SBCI loan last year did make the banks sit up and take notice. Obviously, there's going to be challenges from a cost point of view. It's been a very expensive year in all sectors straight across the board. More sectors and more areas, I suppose, as you outlined earlier on, the southeast area and probably the southwest area have been the most affected areas, which ironically is probably the most productive part of the country and the most intensive part of the country as well. So we had the crisis or the fodder issue last year in Charlie's neck of the wood, which wouldn't be as serious an issue in my opinion, because there's not as much stock in that part of the country compared to the southeast.
Lorcan, your members on the ground, can you tell us a bit about the human impact here, what you're hearing, the concerns that are out there?
Yeah, I suppose Teagasc has come out with the figures of it's around 11% deficit countrywide. But when you put that into context, there's loads of people is fine, there's some people has surplus, and then down at the end of the country, there's some people in dire straits with maybe only 50%, 50% short. So they are in dire straits. So we're hearing more from them. We were hearing more from, say, my part of Ireland, the northern part of it earlier in the spring. But it's down south, there's people in dire straits. And I suppose, we would start talking about availability of cheap money. 4 or 5% is what you get money at here. We need cheaper money, and by Irish context in Europe, money is available readily for farmers at 2%. And the best we can do here is 4.8%. So, and this SBCI money that is being promised to us coming in the next 2 or 3 months or whatever, that is not going to be available. My understanding, it won't be available to we'd say stock loans or for current spending. It's more for investments and in the future. So we need money for farmers to buy fodder, to buy extra meal now, etc. So I think that's a big issue. And even getting away from the current crisis, we should be able to get money at 2% plus, not up on 4%, So that's a big, huge issue. On what the government, I suppose, has done in the past, look, we welcome all the measures. I think there should be funding for transport of silage. Like, you know, the transport is a huge issue. If there was bales available in County Cavan to get them down to Kilkenny, it would more than double their price. So, you know, the transport subsidy from bringing it into the country is good, but I think it would be a help if it was available there. And the other thing that some of our members is not happy with, there's no subsidy for bringing in straw. And straw, while it's not high in food value, with mixing with concentrates, it's a great thing at stretching the fodder for the winter. So a couple of things like that. I think all the co-ops is doing their best. You know, they will bring in fodder, but we're limited to 80,000 tonne. And 80,000 tonne, I think, is only about a day's silage for the whole of Ireland. So it's a very, very small amount. And in fairness, I suppose, with Teagasc, they have been, and I'm on the interstate fodder group, and Teagasc has given advice on a weekly on how to maximise the grass growth and the management. Teagasc has done their utmost there to encourage people. We have to get the thing right at home. Like, we're not going to save the fodder prices by bringing in fodder, because physically we couldn't bring in enough. So I suppose, you know, finance, and then, as I said, there is people in dire straits. While, you know, average of 11%. You know, there's people up to 50%, and that's, you know, that's when you put the whole lot together, we don't sound so bad, but definitely there is people in there in dire straits.
And in budget 2018, Minister Creed did announce that there would be the 25 million for the low-cost agri loans, and that would be announced by the end of the year, but we're near the back end as it is. Are you disappointed that that announcement hasn't been made?
I'm disappointed that has not been made now, but also that it's not going to be available. My understanding, it won't be. It's only for investment. It won't be available for we'll say, to purchase food for current spending. That's my understanding of that we won't be able to use it to buy fodder and for the normal. It's only you'll have to have a plan of investment. That's my understanding of where that's coming. And, you know, it's a long way away, Christmas or whenever it's going to be announced. You know, he should be here the day announcing it.
Pat, can you shed any light on that? Yes. Why is there a delay with the scheme?
There was two schemes announced last year, and this is something we learned from the commission we had a couple of weeks ago. The first scheme was the 300 million scheme for the agri-food sector, which was announced as a Brexit scheme, which was announced earlier in the year, and that scheme was up and running. SPCI are the main funders of these schemes, and they can only run one scheme at a time. The big ask this time last year was a capital scheme on the basis of done through SPCI, the scheme that Lorcan has been talking about. And that was a scheme that was initially planned last year in the budget. 25 million was set aside. But obviously then things changed during the year. We had the crisis, the difficulty in the spring, and now we have difficulty summer and coming into the fall. So the scheme has to be changed now. That's the reason why it has been held up. In order to make funding available for the day-to-day running of the farm, if we use that particular phrase that Lorcan is talking about, the scheme would have to be changed from the capital investment scheme that was initially looked for this time last year. So that's the big issue at the moment.
So when will it be announced?
My understanding is it's going to be announced, and I thought actually it might happen this week. That's my understanding. I haven't talked to the Minister in the last couple of weeks. They were going to do it this week, but obviously the weather has changed things completely for the Minister coming here today.
So it's imminent?
Sorry? It is imminent, yes. Yeah, but once the SPCI can only run one scheme at a time, and they're the main funders in this particular scheme. So they're dealing directly with the 300 million Brexit scheme at the moment. Once that is up and running in a very streamlined way, the other scheme will be ready to go.
Charlie, you mentioned about a hardship fund. Is throwing money at the problem really a long-term solution?
Well, I think we have to recognise and be prepared for the fact that a lot of farmers will find themselves in very real difficulty as the winter goes on, and we need to be prepared and be in a position to support them. And I think we are very clear that a hardship fund will be necessary to provide that reassurance and to be in a position to support them when the time comes. But I think, and just to follow up on the point in relation to the low interest loans, we do believe that a good appropriate credit product through the SPCI, where the actual loan is guaranteed by the government, actually will deal with a lot of the difficulties and credit problems that farmers are finding going into the winter, and should be the first port of call in relation to actually dealing with what's facing them. But it's entirely unacceptable that we see that the Minister working with the SPCI, but the Minister and the government have not delivered the loan, which was announced with a great hoopla in the budget last year, and which has been talked up non-stop since then. Yet a year on, we still haven't seen that loan scheme delivered. And last budget we were 18 months away from Brexit. Now we're 6 months away from Brexit. At the end of the day, the loan scheme was supposed to be to assist the farming community prepare for Brexit. And I mean, when the government are saying to us, oh, trust us, we can handle the Brexit issue, we can deal with it, we're going to be prepared, no matter how big the problem is, we're on top of it. Yet when you see the actual micro of it in terms of what we're expecting them to do, a year on, nothing has happened, and the product hasn't been delivered in relation to the Brexit loan scheme. And I think, unfortunately, it's a reflection really of where rural Ireland and agriculture has become on the government list of priorities, because if the will had been properly there, I think we would have seen it delivered, and it wouldn't have been, that wouldn't have been tolerated by the government or stood over by the government in another sector of the economy. Yet in agriculture, it can just be left trailing along and at the bottom of the list.
Pat, do you want to go in on that?
Yeah, no, I think playing political football with this is not going to sort out the issue, to be quite honest. I think we are, I suppose it's been a difficult year, and we're seeing a lot of change over the last couple of years. I think the time has come now for an honest discussion about how we're going to deal with this in the future. I think we can't have a discussion on a month by month basis about how we're going to deal with a crisis, be it a drought crisis, be it a flood crisis, be it a wind crisis or whatever else. I think we're going to have an honest and a grown-up discussion now about how we need to put the fund in place in CAP as we go forward. We've had some talk about an insurance type scheme that has been mentioned previously by other European countries, this type of scheme. We have a crisis reserve fund within the CAP at the moment that we can't access. There's a 1% return to farmers every year, but 1% is very little coming back to a farmer on a year-by-year basis. I think in the new CAP, that's where we have to have this discussion. A model whereby, in the event that there is a crisis, be it fodder or be it whatever else, that the farmer, and any particular sector, not just the dairy sector or the beef sector or whatever else, can access the scheme that is very straightforward, and that would be beneficial straight away, rather than having to wait for somebody else to intervene going forward. I think we have to have that discussion now straight away, because we have seen what we've seen over the past number of months. We're going to see, obviously, unfortunately, more of this as we go forward as well. And I think that's has to be the most straightforward way going forward.
Martin, it looks like we are going to see more imports over the coming months in order to mitigate the situation. Should farmers be concerned about the quality of the fodder imports that will be coming in?
Oh, of course, it's very important that whatever we do bring in and use transport subsidies for is actually of the highest quality. And actually dry matter is also part of that. There's no point in importing products high in water content, because it's just a waste. That said, I think a lot of the products that are available on the continent are actually of higher quality than we're actually used to ourselves, fodder-wise, particularly the alfalfas and some of the dried maize products, and they're exceptionally good. So it's not something that there's a real problem with as such. But I think one of the lads said earlier on, you won't solve a fodder crisis with imports. There has to be many more strings to it than that, because it's simply not feasible just in terms of volume, to make all of it in imports. So some of it will be solved by actually feeding straight to cows, particularly during the dry cow period. So if you have a substantial deficit, that's the time to tackle the issue rather than waiting until the spring.
And on the level of communication between yourselves in Glanbia and the farmers on the ground, how are you communicating with them at the moment? What's the level of communication like?
If I go right back from last spring, obviously we had a large number of meetings with farmers. We had schemes available at that time. We had a lot of meetings on the ground over the summer. Even our recent fodder clinic type meetings, we had probably nearly half the milk suppliers went through those. They were extremely well attended and very well engaged. And then, of course, we had a lot of communication with offers around the extended credit scheme, which was a zero interest scheme, and more recently a fund equip scheme at a very low interest rate, where people need to buy stuff that for the next couple of years, where they can spread it out at 2.5% interest if it's on 3 years, or 3.5% if it's on 5. So we engaged very much with them. We have a weekly communication through our Connect, and we send them out an e-sign. So it's very regular communication, a lot of good advice going out to them right across the spectrum, from crops to the catch crops for the back in there, to the animal health piece, to the winter fodder piece. And then we have nearly 100 customer facing guys on the ground, either in branches or on the road. So I think we've exceptional level of communication with farmers here.
Lorcan, would your members agree with that summation?
Yeah. Basically, yeah. And just before I forget, on what Pat said earlier on, we to save against volatility. We've been pushing to his colleagues in government on the farm management deposit scheme. So I'd hope he'd take that back to them and work very hard on it. But going back to here, Yeah, the stuff is coming in, and people has to basically get organised and get their fodder in line. So I think basically everything we can do is being done. So that's the way we look at it.
What about just the long-term output, outlook, and what measures would you propose that need to be brought in long-term? Because these are events that we have faced, 3 or 4 different storms this year, the drought situation, the responses. I know we have to respond to the immediate situation, but long term, would you have confidence that there will be measures put in place to prevent and protect farmers?
Yeah, long term, I think up until we say this winter gone by, different advisors has been pushing farmers to increase, and possibly, there was a term, the farm profit monitor, as we all know, emphasis was put on profit, and there wasn't a backup plan there if things went wrong. So I think advisors has changed, and we are, as an interagency group for fodder, they are pushing to have a buffer of 4 to 6 weeks. A normal winter, whether it's in the south of 4 months or in the north of 6 months, that there should be 6 weeks surplus silage there. And I think after this year, people will look at that tighter, and they have to. And other things, as I said there, the low cost schemes have to come in. Some type of a farm management scheme where on a good year, like last year, prices were relatively good for dairy, relatively good growth, that we can put money aside. We're in a tax efficient way. Now, as I said earlier, we're not looking for this as a tax haven, a tax efficient way that it can alleviate it. If a farmer had over maybe 3 or 4 years had 20,000-30,000 in a tax efficient scheme, this year he could take it out, would take an awful lot of pressure off it, that he'd have that money aside to use on a bad year. And we're open, and we have put proposals forward to government in a completely transparent measure. We're not looking for any loopholes for tax, but a measure to do that, which we'll be able to help ourselves in a small way anyway. And I know bringing in the fodder, the crops has been brilliant, organising and financing it and transport and everything, but we can't be looking for that every year. We have, as I said, we have to realise that we weather the way it is, we have to have a buffer of 6 weeks silage for no matter what part of the country you're in.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you all very much for joining us, and we're going to go and take a quick break now for 5 minutes.